The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, so hello everyone and welcome to the iSpring Solutions webinar. Thank you very much for joining us today as we're having a very exciting guest, Stewart Milton. Hi Stewart, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, Paulina. Thanks for the invitation.
Wonderful. Stewart is an iSpringer and also a learning facilitator within Glasgow University. And before joining GCU, he trained over 2,000 attendees at his e-learning classes and mentored hundreds of organizations such as United Nations, Diageo, Thomas Airways, and many more. And today, Stuart will talk about his experience of training 1,500 staff in 12 months and also overcoming their surpassing audit target. As always, I'm here with you. My name is Paulina. I will be the moderator for today's webinar. And I have invited my colleague Sophia from support department. Hi, Sophia. How are you doing today?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for.
So Sophia is a senior technical support engineer, and she will be taking care of your question, guys. So if you have anything you would like to ask Stuart or any questions you have about iSpring product, just don't hesitate to submit them in the question box. And right now on the screen, you may see how it looks. So if you look at the right side of the GoToWebinar panel, you may find the question box somewhere at the bottom. And also, I just wanted to quickly mention that the recording of this webinar will be sent to everyone who registered, so you guys will receive the recording afterwards as soon as it's uploaded to YouTube. However, I would very much encourage you to stay till the very end, till the Q&A session, because I think it's an awesome opportunity to ask your questions, to address your questions to our today's expert. And one more little tiny thing that I would like to share with you before we move on to the actual presentation is the exciting news. The iSpring Suite version 9 has been released, and the release was on Tuesday, April 24th, and now this product is really the one-stop shop for creating e-learning videos, courses, and assessments. So if you guys have any questions about how you can get this new version, or you would like to discuss the project you're planning to work on, just share your email address in the question box so that we know that we need to get to you after the webinar. Okay, I'm done for now, and I would very much like to grant presenter rights to Stuart as well as the microphone.
Thank you.
All right, looks like we can see your screen, Stuart.
Everything okay your end, Paulina? Yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me today. And really a special thanks to Paulina for organising this event, because they're never easy in my experience. What I want to do today is just go through some slides very quickly to introduce a project that we completed at Glasgow Caledonian University, and that actually trained 1,500 staff to meet an audit target. So I'm going to make a start, and just after the information about this project, I'll also be sharing the results of our focus groups, which we ran after the courses to better understand what our users actually needed from courses itself. One of the things that I was hoping to share with you was really just to try and reflect on the challenge of traditional and e-learning. And sometimes I feel that we overlook this. I do a lot of teaching with master's degree students face-to-face. I have another university appointment. And you can see from the diagram that we all know that communication is very easy. It's a two-way process. The challenge when you're starting any of these projects, of course, especially with e-learning, is that it's very different. Communication essentially in e-learning tends to be one way, and it's information being sent to you through the screen. So it's what I call a solitary way of learning. And the reason I've used this slide is that contains implications for all of us. So when we design e-learning modules with iSpring, we need to bear this in mind, that we want to engage the user and try and overcome this one-way channel of communication. So with this project, and it's probably a similar approach you should adopt, you really need to very firmly try and agree a simple SMART objective. And SMART, if you look it up, you'll see specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, tangible. There's all sorts of definitions for it, but it all comes down to the same thing. You try and specify clearly what you hope to achieve. In this example that we done, we also used a model to loosely guide us. And the ADDIE model is very commonly used, and it has defined stages. Particularly, you would move through these sequentially when you're actually creating your online courses. With the SMART objective that we had, it was fairly straightforward. We had to train 90% of our total staff within 12 months, and that was to meet an audit target. Now, one of the things you can do here is you can also create design templates and a player. So when you're starting your courses with iSpring, it's a good idea to not just use the model to loosely follow the actual sequence that I've mentioned in the diagram, but also look at customizing the templates that you're going to use. And I mean things like the player controls. And the reason you do that is so there's a consistent design. You also need to think about how you're going to grade and report the results. If you go back to your SMART objective, I clearly said at the beginning, 90% of staff, and we have a total complement, possibly around about 1,600. In order to get a measurement on that, you have to use, particularly with the size of this project, a learning management system. You can also use email reporting within iSpring. I've used it before, but that's not advisable if you have large numbers of learners. So it's okay for a small group, perhaps up to 20, 30 learners, but once it goes above that, it is virtually unmanageable. One of the key things with any e-learning course that I typically do, and iSpring is certainly no exception, is I will storyboard. And it's taken me many years and teaching hundreds or if not thousands of people that I've came to realize that there's no right way of doing this. And that's why I've clearly said, use whatever you enjoy or whatever method that you like. There's online storyboards. There's also, for example, just as I've done with paper-based, there's all sorts of different ways that you can actually sketch out the sequence of the course, which is really what I'm trying to do most of the time. The other thing you should do is try and plan and visualize the journey. And what I mean by planning is you should use the objective from the SMART objective and then start to build the actual flow of the storyboard, whether it's paper-based or online, does not matter. And it's to try and give you a good idea of the visualization. How is the process actually going to be created? What steps are involved? Now, when I've talked about visualizing the process, there's a number of things that you need to consider, and I'm going to just touch on these for you. First of all, there's the iSpring content. Now, some of you may already be using iSpring, and there may be people who are new to it, who are thinking about using it. So typically, your content, the courses, as you all know, are developed locally, and by locally I mean on your laptop or PC. You then need to think about publishing those files, and I'm going to touch on some of the things we have learned from this. Now, if you are producing, you would typically use HTML or HTML5 for the web if we're running over the internet, or you would use Scorum if you intend to upload the course to a learning management system. So HTML or for the web is just for a typical web type site structure of the course, but Scorum is always where you have graded reporting, and it's a learning management system. The learning management system that we use within Glasgow Caledonian University is Blackboard. And one thing I would mention about Blackboard, if you're using it, and this is a critical thing to remember, is that iSpring has a building block. It's amazing how many people overlook this, but it's absolutely critical in my experience. The building block you would download from the iSpring website. You download that onto your computer, and then you upload that building block to Blackboard. Now, let me just clarify something again. The building block has been written specifically by iSpring for the Blackboard learning management system. Let me just be very clear on that. So you don't need to use the building block if you have another LMS. It is specific to Blackboard. The other thing you need to consider is the user testing. Now, although you may do the testing on your local machine, I would actually take it a stage further, and I would argue there's far more value to test it on the learning management system, and I'm going to discuss that very briefly. So for the user testing, you'd be looking at things like the actual usability of it, and things like what we call 508, Section 508 accessibility. And finally, you have the delivery, the actual delivery to the end users of the course. So just to clarify, when your course, you're working on it, it's all done locally, as you're well aware. One tip that I would give you, if you're working in a small team, which certainly we do all the time, then you need to get into good habits. And the habits for major projects like this, where you can have a whole load of files flying around, is to export the course as a zip file. And you normally find that, I believe it's in the file command of iSpring. Once you export it as a zip, it then grabs all the content you've added to the course pages so that it can be shared with your team members. So just be aware of that. It can catch you out if you don't go through the export properly. Now, I mentioned earlier, you have to make a decision at some point, and you will know what you're going to do with it. Is it just to run off a website, or do we really need to actually have it hosted within a learning management system? And most of you will probably have learning management systems, but there's many of them. Some of the common ones are Moodle, Blackboard, Canvas, and there's many more. One thing I'm going to mention here, and you can see it at the foot, we did not use Flash. We had big problems with Flash. The problems we had with Flash was that when we used the dual, you have a dual production output of HTML5 and Flash. It will produce both formats. But when that was uploaded to Blackboard, we had all sorts of problems. The screen reading software that we used for accessibility testing for people who have visual problems, it doesn't work with Flash. So a bit of advice, please test it yourself. We were using a piece of software called Read Write, which is for accessibility, and it wouldn't work with Flash. So we very quickly just produced it as HTML5 only. Another thing that we learned from Blackboard during this process, the iSpring building block made it really easy to upload the zipped SCORM files. So the files that we had created, when you go to publish them with iSpring, you'll see there's actually a drop-down menu and it does say Blackboard. So it tells you what to pick. We had no problem with uploading the courses. When we were testing them, and this is an issue with Blackboard, when we had test courses up and we then deleted the test courses because they were no longer required, what we found is that it left the grade columns. So if you imagine we had uploaded perhaps maybe 3 test courses, what we found is that it would create automatically within the learning management system the actual columns to accept the grades. When you deleted the course, it didn't delete the grade column with it. So every time you added a new test course or even a fully functional course, you were duplicating, triplicating, and simply adding to the columns. And the actual grades could be copied across the columns. So just a word of advice, it is not an issue with iSpring, but always test your courses on your learning management system. It's absolutely vital. When we done the user testing, as a small team, we all took turns of doing the testing, and we tested using a number of different browsers. Internet Explorer, you know, Chrome, Firefox, all of them, Safari. We then looked at different device types, tablets, smartphones, and really you'll find that nothing is perfect. If I'm honest with you, you will find with any courses that you're doing, generally on a smaller screen, it tends to be more difficult to actually just view content because of the screen size. There's no getting away from that. But iSpring worked very well, even on handheld devices. But you have to be prepared to do the actual testing, and it's crucial. And finally, just here is on the actual delivery. When we delivered this training, one of the things that certainly I was very keen on was to try and do focus groups to learn from our users, which were predominantly staff members, of what was good and bad about the courses. Where could we improve things? And the way that we done that was running focus group discussions. We also had online surveys, and we used smartphone voting. So our attendees would have their phone with them, their smartphones, and would be able to vote on course designs and all sorts of issues, just simply using their smartphone and an application called Poll Everywhere. And I have details of that in just a moment. So I did mention this earlier, and if you're running or you've been given a task of running a course like this, which is very extensive, you're talking 1,500 staff. That's how many we put through this in 12 months. That's quite a significant number, and it's not easy. You have all sorts of issues to consider. So if you're using a learning management system like Canvas or Moodle, any of these standard learning management systems, or even some of the other ones, then you would typically use SCORM. You would choose SCORM. SCORM is very common. There are other types which you can enable, like API, CMI5. All those really mean, it's just technical jargon. It just simply means, what does it report to the learning management system? So SCORM enables your lesson, the iSpring course, to speak or to talk to the learning management system. And primarily it talks by the way of moving the grades. So the scores from the users are moved from your course quiz questions and passed to the learning management system. If you're using Blackboard, you can see on this diagram that I'd actually chosen the iSpring learning module. And that's enabled because I had uploaded the building block. And that's what you see when the building block is enabled on Blackboard. The other thing to consider in your learning management system, and again, it's because of the scale of the project, how on earth do you keep track of who's done the course when you have something like 1,600 staff to consider? How do you keep tabs on who's not completed or whose grades are actually below the pass rates? How do you follow all of this up? The answer is that you have to try and look at using the grade reporting within your learning management system. And all of these will be quite different. So each learning management system will typically have a grade center of some kind. What may differ is the reporting that's available. And in here, you can see in the diagram that I actually used color grading because I simply found it easier to monitor the scores, and I could look at them on an aggregate basis too, collectively. Basically, all I done there was I just simply said to the LMS, if a score is above or below a certain grade, color it green or red. If it fell below 50%, I think I remember that it just colored it red. And that allowed me to very quickly identify if we had any major issues in some of our courses or our users. Now, the other thing you should consider is certainly look at adding animation within some of your courses, absolutely no doubt. So the animation itself, you really need to choose where you use animation, and that's to help your learners, as I've mentioned, really basically perceive your content. You're looking at making a better impression on your learners and have content that's a bit more visually attractive. So definitely animate, but a word of caution. Resist the urge to animate everything. And I've seen this so often. In many courses, we have 1,001 transitions and all sorts of fancy animation. And let me be honest with you, and I have taught thousands and I've created hundreds of courses. All it simply does is it detracts from the user experience. You will start to then lessen the impact of the overall lessons because there's far too much distraction going on in your courses. So try and keep the animation where it adds value, perhaps explaining a particular concept or a model, but try and just resist that urge to do it too often. Now, I spoke earlier, just 2 seconds ago, about animation, and I've actually created this chart on PowerPoint, and it tends to be very popular because it's interactive, it's engaging. So what happens when I click the button? You can see right away that the chart is more visually interesting because I'm revealing the value and some information. But the biggest difference here, think back to my first slide. Cast your mind back to one of my first slides where I spoke about the solitary experience. Now, you're actually asking the user to do something. You're engaging the user to click a button, to find out or discover something. It seems very simple, but that level of interactivity, it leads to better immersion with the courses. The users will actually feel a greater sense of ownership with the courses and will actually find it more rewarding. So if you want to know how this was done, I'll be delighted to send you the PowerPoint if it's helpful at all. Absolutely no problems. And my contact deals, which I will give you, will be at the end of this short presentation. But to sum it up, this was simply done. There is nothing fancy. It is PowerPoint animation. However, I used a trigger to execute the animation. And as most of you know, the trigger was actually the button that I clicked. What I would like to touch on now is what we've learned as a result of running the focus groups. And I'm hoping that this will be valuable for you to create your own courses and to perhaps learn from some of the mistakes that we've made. We ran around 4 focus groups, and as you can see on screen clearly, we had 22 attendees. I made a decision after this 4th group had finished that there wasn't really much point in doing any more, simply for the reason that they were all saying the same things. There was actually a similarity across many of the responses, and I'm going to share some of these with you now. One of the things that I looked at bringing in here was the VARC learning styles. Now, some of you may be unaware of this. You do not need to use it, but if you want to experiment, then certainly I would encourage you to use it. So what actually is it? It is an online questionnaire, but you can actually administer it offline as well in old-fashioned paper format if you find that easier. The reason that you can do the learning styles is to help you better understand how do your learners prefer to actually learn themselves. Is it easier? Do they prefer more images? And this is why we have things like visual, oral, which is audio. Do they appreciate things like sound? Does that help them learn more? Is it reading? Do they want more text? Kinesthetic means actually doing something. If you cast your mind back, just one slide ago, we asked them to click a button. So that would really fall into the kinesthetic learning style. So all I was really trying to do here, and you can please feel free to look it up. As I say, you don't need to use this. It's just simply another suggestion that you may or may not want to use to help you identify learning styles. Why was I doing this? Because what I found is that a lot of our learners were multimodal, and that simply means that their preferred learning style actually involves a number of these elements. It's not just text, it's not just images, it is actually a mix of those elements. Some of them have a stronger preference towards things like images, or even things like, writing, where the read-write preference, but predominantly it was very mixed. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention to you here, which we had done, and this was very successful, was actually encouraging the users, again, to become involved in the design stage too. So we actually asked them, just bring your smartphones or a tablet and you can vote on your preferred design. And those of you who are familiar with iSpring will recognize the Talkmaster image on my screen. The difference there with Talkmaster is I've customized the background image. So the lady on the picture is from the stock photographs, but the background is from my smartphone. I actually took a picture of the university entrance. What did I learn from this, or what did we all learn from it? My advice there, you have to get the users actively involved in design. It leads to far greater ownership of your courses. And personally, as instructors, as trainers, designers, we will learn so much from it. So get them actively involved in it. And just so you're aware, there's another course I'm designing this now, and I've actually sent the profile, the rough work of it, to those very same people that we asked on the focus groups. And we have listened to their suggestions and their preferences, and it's proving very, very popular. The other thing that we've done here too is we provided an online survey. The online survey was just quickly done at the focus group. So we had staff turning up at the focus group, and we simply asked them, we had laptops available, please could you complete the online survey? And as you can see here, that gave us some qualitative data. We were asking them how they felt about some of the courses. Has it improved their knowledge or their learning? Generally, we had a very positive outcome from the training that we had provided for, as I say, 1,500 staff had completed in 12 months. And that actually helped us. It gave us some reassurance that we were doing certainly many things correctly. So it had a positive outcome, but we were able to measure this and measure the actual strength of opinion through some of these online survey questions too. This was very interesting. I really was very surprised at some of this. Just one or two elements took me by surprise, really. We asked the staff members to indicate what they preferred. What do you actually like? And lo and behold, we actually found that text came in a way down in joint third place. They actually preferred interactivity, no great surprise there, and they also enjoyed quizzing. So the testing element and the interactivity, that proved very, very popular. Text was actually, as you can see on screen, that actually came in joint third with video. So that's really interesting when you think about the preferences and how that may affect your content when you start designing. The other thing we've done here is a facilitated group discussion. And I've actually extracted these comments from the feedback that we actually recorded with the permission of all the attendees, and they also signed off forums. That all of it was done very openly. We could not attribute any of the audio to an individual, but we recorded those sessions just through a laptop and microphone in a group discussion, and we went over specific issues that we had on screen about the content. What we found there was that it's a recurring theme. Users want shorter content. I'll be more explicit. What do we mean by shorter? Some of the suggestions that we were given were around 5 to 7 minutes maximum. They wanted more images. Now, for those of you who have longer courses to create, I'm not suggesting that 1 hour can be reduced to 7 minutes. I'm not saying that. What I'm going to suggest, though, is that you can very cleverly break the 1 hour up into very short courses and use a table of contents, a TOC is referred to it, to actually then link to those course elements. And that can all be done certainly within iSpring, and you can also use hyperlink navigation as well. So keep it short, use images. Again, the same, someone said, we found it a bit long. You know, I was struggling to try and complete it because I'm busy at work, I've got interruptions, and we need it shorter. So we have learned a great deal from that. You know, some of our modules weren't terribly long. They might have been about 15, 20 minutes, but for the end user, that was long. So now what we're doing is actually looking at how we can reduce the length of the modules and actually say more with less, which I'll explain later too. Another comment. You can see again the recurring theme, shorter bursts, more interaction. So what users are telling us is they want to be more engaged. They want things to do within the lessons, things that will actually force them to think or to engage a bit more with the content. And that's a challenge, but it's certainly something you can overcome. My advice again here, keep it short and say more with less. And what I mean, I'll be very specific about this. When I say more with less, what I'm trying to say there is that you should look at using things like infographics, and I'll just discuss that with you. Here we have an infographic that was actually used within our focus groups. And we asked all the attendees to rate it. Which one do you prefer? Please vote on it, we said. Use your smartphone and vote now. If you look at the content On each side of the screen, it's exactly the same. The only difference is the way it's laid out and the addition of the magnifying glass image. No great surprise. Virtually everyone wanted the infographic. I then decided to push them further, and within the focus group I asked them, why do you prefer it? And some of the responses we got, the use of colour. Oh, the 60% is so bold, I'll never forget it. It's so easy to remember. Because the text ran more vertically, they actually found it easier to scan. So this is why I was suggesting to you that sometimes you can say more with less. And what I'm trying to hint at is that if we cleverly use infographics and reduce the text information by summarizing it in some way, then we can actually achieve the similar outcome. So it's just a bit of imagination that's needed. And I'm just going to wrap up now in just a wee moment, and I will be able to take questions too. Just before I go, my final bit of advice on this is feel free to experiment. You have to experiment when you're creating these lessons. And certainly from all the experience I have, use a large font. We tested fonts. I think Calibri was the font that we used in the courses. Remember, of course, you need to consider system fonts, what fonts might be installed on the computers of your users, because you have a thing called font substitution as well. But we used Calibri because of the extensive testing we had done. It was one of the easiest fonts to read on screen. So I'm just going to wrap up now, but certainly be reassured that infographics, they certainly seem to work, and we've actually tested that in our focus groups, and you can see a unanimous response. And that has actually influenced the course designs that I'm presently working on right now. Now, for today, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to attend. I know it's not easy with all of your busy schedules, but you can also ask me any questions. I'm sure Paulina will arrange this in the next couple of minutes. If you have questions for me, I'll certainly try my best to answer them. And if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, if you want to private message me or connect in any way in LinkedIn, you can see the URL in yellow just on the screen here. So Paulina, can I hand over to you now for any questions? Would that be okay?
Sure. Thank you very much, Stuart. I think everyone enjoyed the presentation, and I would like to mention one more time that the recording of this presentation of this webinar will be sent to you guys as well as the Stuart presentation. Is that correct? I can share your presentation, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct, yeah.
Wonderful. And also right now in the comments, I will be sharing the link to our blog where we have post with the details on Stuart's case. So if you guys would like to take a closer look at it, you're welcome to go and read it in our blog. And let's get down to our questions that actually came in the chat and also via mail. And the one that I received was from Jane. She is asking, what's your favorite method of storyboarding?
I think I illustrated that earlier. Paulina, I'm lazy. I make no excuse for it, and I tend to like to work very quickly. So for me, the way that I find most natural is just simply picking up basically some paper. I actually just use a notebook, and I will just try and visualize the flow. So I'm quite comfortable doing that, but I appreciate that other people do things online. But I think when you're starting in e-learning, sometimes it can be intimidating, and you tend to second guess yourself that you should be using something very high tech. As long as it gets the job done, I really don't care. And that's why I prefer the notepad.
Awesome. All right, thank you very much. And there was also a question from Peter. Which software you use for Flash testing?
Peter, thank you for the question. We used screen reading software to test for accessibility, and it was called Read and Write Gold. Read and Write Gold. We used that tool, Peter, because it's an available tool within the university, and it was on our application store. So it was a tool that we could readily access. I have to be quite open here. iSpring worked really well for accessibility. Absolutely fantastic. It was tested by our disability team, and we also tested it personally ourselves. As soon as you moved the mouse over any button, like next or previous, the actual software would read that aloud, including paragraphs of text. Anything on the screen was picked up, including even any notes. So I was really very, very impressed by it. And I have to say, iSpring done a great job for HTML5. It's just simply incompatible with the screen reading software in Flash. And I've heard from other people similar stories.
Thanks a lot, Stewart. And here are also a couple of comments that we received. For example, one from Ellen. Thanks for sharing your experience, and I have got great ideas for my own project. And another comment from D. Thank you so much. Great information. The next one from John. Thank you, Stewart, for clear and engaging presentation. And comment from Peter. Thanks. That was very interesting. So I think that people really enjoyed your presentation from these comments. And there was also another question from Ian that I really would like to address. And if you are if you for some reason are confused with it, maybe Sophia can help us. Have you used SCORM 2004 with Blackboard, as a new iSpring 9 will not work with the building block?
Yeah, I mean, I've not used, I'm well aware of that question, as we both know that there's basically two flavors of SCORM. There's 1.2 and I believe it's 2004. And Sophia will tell me if I'm wrong. I think the major difference there is simply the depth of reporting. That 2004 will normally report that little bit more information about the learner and what they've been doing on the course. From memory, I've not used the actual, I've not used the SCORM with Blackboard, and let me explain why. Do you remember when I said earlier, because I have the building block installed, and I've been using, up to now, it was version 8 of Blackboard. Version 9, I believe, was only released yesterday or the day before. But we've been using, on the publish menu, there's a drop down, and it actually gives you SCORM, CMI5, etc. I've been choosing Blackboard because it then puts it in a format, and again, Sophia will correct me, that's compatible with the building block. So I'm always choosing Blackboard for my publishing option because I know I have the building block installed. Sophia, have you anything to add there?
Thank you, Stewart. Hello once again, guys, and sorry that I had lags on my end, so that's why you didn't hear me. And as for the feature, so I should tell you that the feature was removed in the new iSpring Suite 9 version. I mean the type Blackboard 9.x in the learning course settings. However, Blackboard LMS supports 2004 SCORM now, so there's no longer need to include this option in our editor.
So Sophia, can I clarify? So are you, because this is all quite new to me, because as you know, the version 9 has really just been released yesterday. I've had little chance to have a real deep look at it. So are we actually saying now that the Blackboard option from the publish menu has been removed and we should now use 2004, is that correct?
Yes, exactly. Just like SCORM 2004.
Okay, that's good to know, because we do have some other courses that we'll look at preparing, and I've no doubt that they'll obviously be going to Blackboard as well, so thank you.
You're always welcome.
That's awesome, Stuart. You taught us something and you also learned something from this webinar.
Well, we've been very lucky. We learned a great deal, and I continue learning from our users. But I was very sincere. What I mentioned earlier is don't be afraid to ask people what do they prefer in their learning resources. If you build around what they actually need and prefer, you'll have a far greater chance of success.
Right, right. And let's move on to the next question from Laura. And it's quite long, so if you would like, I will repeat it.
Okay.
When doing a series
Sure
of
thing.
e-learning modules, what have you learned about how much to maintain consistency in look and feel versus how much to change it up from lesson to lesson? In other words, do learners appreciate predictability, or would that cause boredom and therefore disengagement?
Laura's got a great question there. It's an absolutely smashing question. But I generally, as I say, just because of all the experience I have, and I have actually created literally hundreds of e-learning courses for major companies, I've actually watched and learned from so many people, and I've came to the conclusion, and I always say this, boring is good. And what I mean by boring is good is your learners do not like surprises. What happens if you have them, for example, with a design, say the first 5 pages of a course are perhaps have a slightly color of blue or green, and then the next 5 pages have different buttons or different colors or a different layout, you can actually confuse them. It leads to confusion. So that's why I said boring is good. I'm a very firm believer in using, if you can, templates, but not just something, you don't need to have boring templates. You can actually have something that looks really good if you take the design, take the time to pick a decent design and customize the design to suit you. But I would certainly use templates with the same design and the same navigation button layout as well. Because as the learner goes through the course, they actually become used to it. There's an expectation of what they're going to find on the next page. And when you start chopping and changing this, it can actually lead to confusion with the learners. So I'm not a huge fan of that. If you want to make a distinction between some pages, you can do that through the use of some titling, maybe a different background color at a title for emphasis, but maintain the same design and layout if you can.
So, am I correct? What you're saying is that the design shouldn't affect user experience.
Well, what I'm saying is that you have to have consistency in design. So when you have a design, you want to replicate that design if possible. You don't want the design to be different from a couple of pages in your course. So where you have navigation buttons, or you may be using certain text blocks or even images, it's normally useful to try and use them consistently.
Sure.
Not have them all over the place in the course. Actually, I've observed users in real time through monitors actually observing them. And it actually causes confusion for them because they're not terribly sure whether they've done something right or wrong because it's not what they expect to see. And that's the challenge. Too much of a surprise actually disengages the users, the learners.
Okay, right. I hope, Laura, that answers your question. And the next one we have from... Sorry, go ahead.
No, if Laura wishes to ask me any more, I'm delighted to try and help. And as I said, my LinkedIn URL is there. Laura can contact me there, and I'm happy to try and, as I say, take that discussion forward. But I'm always very careful about design. It has to be consistent to keep the learner engaged.
Thank you, Stuart. Let's move on to the Barry's question. One comment: clicking a button doesn't really qualify as true interaction. Did you use any other methods to invoke user engagement?
Sorry, Paulina, can you repeat that? Because the audio had dropped out slightly.
Oh, no. Okay, sure. Clicking a button doesn't really qualify as true interaction. Did you use any other methods to invoke user engagement?
Well, yes, we did actually. We did. That was only one method. The other things that we done as well, within the email module, we also used embedded video. So we had embedded video of actually showing users, again, how they can, it was actually to prevent email issues with confidential data. So we actually had an embedded video within that which the user could interact with as well. But the level of interaction was simply really down to playing the video and observing. But when we asked questions about that, we did have a positive response. People enjoyed the video, and that seemed to go down very well. So we used a mixture of buttons, but I think one of the things you have to be aware of, one of the things I would mention very strongly, because I use many authoring tools, is that the depth, and that's the word I would use, the depth of interaction is different across different tool sets, and you can actually only do so much with PowerPoint. If you want to go to other authoring, you can actually use things like variables, you can use layers, and all of these really run off JavaScript. But I use, I'm also a certified author with Lectora, and I use other tools like Storyline, etc. as well. But with PowerPoint, just remember, you're a little bit more limited in terms of what interactions you can actually complete.
Thank you, Stuart. And the question from Maggie. Would you be able to speak
Yes.
to gamification and using games to engage audience in learning programs?
Yes, I mean, gamification is very popular. I think the other thing I would mention too is that when you're introducing gamification, you have to have a clear purpose for it as well. That's going back to my earlier objective. I did look at introducing gamification, but a lot of the people within our organisation, we're still quite conservative in some ways when we're looking at developing the content. And so I think they felt at the time that because of the nature of the subject, it was quite a serious subject with data protection, that perhaps gamification didn't fit very well. But the research that I've read, gamification, it's certainly popular, and it does lead to quite deep engagement with the user. I think where the challenge is picking a subject or a topic that actually suits gamification very well. And I think that's sometimes a challenge. Is that okay, Paulina? No, I think the audio's went.
Hello.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just forgot to unmute myself.
That's okay.
Thank you very much for taking care of this question. And at this point, I would like to share with you guys a wonderful article, Gamification versus Game-Based Learning. It was presented by an expert, Andy Hughes, who is into that gamification topic and has been producing it for a lot of major companies. And there you will also find the webinar that we held with him. So you are welcome to enjoy the article as well as the video.
Thank you, Paulina. And I'm certainly going to have a look at it as well, because I've looked at gamification in the past, not really used it very much at all, apart from some test courses.
Right. And it's really interesting. It made a lot of things clear to me as well. Okay, so we also have another question from Michael. Could you use a mascot in the template, or is it better to use a person, for example, from the iSpring suite?
Well, just repeat the question again for me, Paulina, please.
So could you use a mascot in could you use a mascot in the template, or is it better to use a person, for example, from the iSpring suite?
Yeah, so this is my understanding of it, and I'm sorry if I've misunderstood it, but when we talk about a mascot, I'm assuming they may mean a type of cartoon character or something, a drawing type character.
Yes,
I'm
Michael
not
said yes.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of these, but let me explain something. When you have to be aware when you're developing these courses, who are you developing it for? Who's the audience? And actually, the organization that you're either doing the work for or you're employed. When I've worked with some of the very big companies, the drinks companies, United Nations, all of them, I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't really use mascot type characters, because it actually undermines the image that they want to give as a corporation. So I would tend to go with the more conservative type picture images because they look more professional, and that's just my opinion. But certainly I've spoken to a few other people, and they generally, if I was doing something for children, if I was doing something for fun for some kids, then I would maybe consider those mascot type characters. But for most e-learning courses, for larger organizations and even smaller ones, I would tend to be a bit more conservative and probably use those photographic stock images, which are actually very good.
Actually, I see that people agree with you in the comments. So yeah, I guess that a lot of them are using the same approach.
You'll have seen, Paulina, when I put up the image earlier with the smartphone, when I used the Talkmaster image, it actually had the lady character on the image. I didn't use a mascot. If you remember that from earlier in the presentation, I clearly used the stock photo. It looks more professional, and it just looks a lot slicker. But as I said, there can be exceptions, but these are very, I think, few and far between.
Thank you very much, Stuart. And before we wrap up, let's cover one more question, because I think this is how much time we have. From Salvador, to better engagement, are you using partial animations in each slide or of the course? It depends on the content type.
Yeah, that's a great question from Salvador, and I do agree with them. I did say this earlier in the animations. I actually said you should animate, and my words clearly were, where it adds value. We didn't animate all the way through the course. So when we put the slides together as a team, we didn't animate everything. And I did say as well that I would avoid transitions. I'm not a huge fan of all of these things, because I do feel it gets too much for the viewer. It actually can, I always joke that it makes the viewer dizzy. So when there's too much going on the screen, it actually undermines the course. So to answer the question, hopefully directly, we only used animation where we believed it was adding value. So the diagram I used earlier with the email server, we were trying to explain where email would be sent to your device, your handheld device, your laptop, your computer. We were trying to actually get them to understand the flow of email across different device types. So that's why we used the animation, but we didn't animate on every slide, not at all. Most of the slides we would use were just some simple text blocks with an image, and the image had to be in context. It had to support and complement what we were trying to explain.
Cool, thank you very much. And yeah,
You're
we
welcome.
have one more minute, and a question from Elaine. What is your definition of death by PowerPoint?
Well, my definition of death by PowerPoint is really, as I said earlier, is trying to actually do too much on the slides. One of my biggest criticisms is really far too much text on slides. There's been research done on this, and our ability to remember things is probably around about 2 lines. We just don't remember things when there's a lot of text and the screen is busy. So to answer this question directly, yes, it can be a common problem, because too many users, they actually think that they need to throw every bit of text on the slides. The value when you're doing courses in iSpring, and I did say this repeatedly, is to say more with less. And that means using things like clever infographics to give the same message, but using far less words. Does that help at all?
I hope so. Elaine, you let us know. Okay, so it looks that it's time for us to wrap up, and I would like to thank you, Stewart, for finding the time to speak for all the iSpringers today. Thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome, and I really enjoyed it, and hopefully some of the experiences that we have had, the people attending today can learn from it, and perhaps their courses will be better as a result of it too. So thank you again, everyone.
Sure. And yes, I would like to thank all of our attendees for coming today and for being so active and asking your questions. Thank you very much, guys. And thanks to you, Sophia, for taking care of the questions during the presentation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for
Thank you,
all your
Sophia.
questions, guys. Thank you, Stewart, for your interesting presentation, and Paulina. Sure.
For my interesting moderation.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, guys, we'll see each other at the next webinar, which we will have next week. It will be dedicated to the new features of iSpring Suite 9. And I have also a surprise for you, I think. I have invited 3 experts who I will be interviewing on what they think of this new update in iSpring Suite. So I think it will be an interesting webinar, and I will be sharing the link with you very, very soon. Okay, so I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Bye, Stuart. Bye, Sophia. Bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
Paulina. I appreciate it. Thank you. Bye now.
Bye bye.